What are the cluster munitions the U.S. is supplying Ukraine with, and why are they so controversial? The United States has confirmed it will supply cluster munitions to Ukraine as part of a new military aid package. First reported last week that U.S. President Joe Biden's administration was strongly considering approving the transfer of the controversial weapons to Ukraine, whose forces have been struggling to make major gains in a weeks-long counteroffensive. Here's what you need to know about the weapons, and why they are controversial. What is a cluster munition? Cluster munitions, also called cluster bombs, are canisters that carry tens to hundreds of smaller bomblets, also known as submunitions. The canisters can be dropped from aircraft, launched from missiles, or fired from artillery, naval guns, or rocket launchers. The canisters break open at a prescribed height, depending upon the area of the intended target, and the bomblets inside spread out over that area. They are fused by a timer to explode closer to or on the ground, spreading shrapnel that is designed to kill troops or take out armored vehicles such as tanks. A cluster bomb capsule at the frontline city of Avdiivka, Ukraine on March 23, 2023. What type of cluster bomb is the U.S. said to be giving to Ukraine? The U.S. has a stockpile of cluster munitions known as DPICMs, or dual-purpose improved conventional munitions, that it no longer uses after phasing them out in 2016. According to an article on the U.S. Army's e-armor website, the DPICMs Washington will give to Kyiv are fired from 155mm howitzers, with each canister carrying 88 bomblets. Each bomblet has a lethal range of about 10 square meters, so a single canister can cover an area up to 30,000 square meters, about 7.5 acres, depending upon the height it releases the bomblets. The bomblets in a DPICM have shaped charges that, when striking a tank or armored vehicle, create a metallic jet that perforates metallic armor, the article says, adding that it can take 10 or more bomblets to destroy an armored vehicle, but it may take only one to disable the armored vehicle's weapons or render it immobile. What are cluster munitions? Cluster munitions contain multiple explosives that are released over an area up to the size of several football fields. They can be dropped from a plane or launched from the ground or sea. The submunitions are released in flight and fall to the ground. They can range from the tens to many hundreds. They are designed to explode on impact, but as many as a third don't, and remain a deadly risk to civilians for years to come. 94% of recorded cluster bomb casualties are civilians, of which almost 40% are children. Have cluster bombs been used in the war in Ukraine before? Yes, both the Ukrainians and the Russians have used cluster bombs since Moscow's forces invaded in February 2022. More recently, Ukrainian forces have begun using Turkish-provided cluster munitions on the battlefield. But Ukrainian officials have been pushing the U.S. to provide its cluster munitions since last year, arguing that they would provide more ammunition for Western-provided artillery and rocket systems, and help narrow Russia's numerical superiority in artillery. Why are cluster munitions more controversial than other bombs? As the bomblets fall over a wide area, they can endanger non-combatants. In addition, somewhere between 10% to 40% of the munitions fail, according to the International Committee of the Red Cross. The unexploded munitions can then be detonated by civilian activity years or even decades later. The Cluster Munition Coalition, an activist group trying to get the weapons banned everywhere, says potentially deadly cluster submunitions still lie dormant in Laos and Vietnam 50 years after their use. In a statement Friday, Human Rights Watch said both Ukraine and Russia had killed civilians with their use of cluster munitions in the war so far. Cluster munitions remain one of the world's most treacherous weapons. They kill and maim indiscriminately and cause widespread human suffering, Giles Carbonier, vice president of the International Committee of the Red Cross, said at a conference on the munition in Switzerland last year. Any use of cluster munitions, anywhere, by anyone, must be condemned, Carbonier said. Much of the world has banned the use of these weapons through the Convention on Cluster Munitions, CCM, which also prohibits the stockpiling, production and transfer of them. Though 123 nations have joined that convention, the United States, Ukraine, Russia and 71 other countries have not. Using the munitions to attack enemy troops or vehicles is not illegal under international law, but striking civilians with the weapons could amount to a war crime, according to Human Rights Watch. Where have cluster bombs been used before? Cluster weapons have been used as far back as World War II and in more than 3 dozen conflicts since, according to the Cluster Munition Coalition. The U.S. last used the weapons in Iraq from 2003 to 2006, the coalition says. U.S. forces began phasing them out in 2016 because of the danger they posed to civilians, according to a 2017 statement from U.S. Central Command. Why are they banned? More than 100 countries, including the UK, France and Germany, have signed an international treaty, the Convention on Cluster Munitions, that outlaws the use or stockpiling of these weapons due to their indiscriminate effect on civilian populations. Children are particularly prone to injury as the bomblets can resemble a small toy left in a residential or farmland area and are often picked up out of curiosity. Human rights groups have described cluster munitions as abhorrent and even a war crime. Who still uses them? Both Russia and Ukraine have been using cluster munitions since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022. Neither have signed the treaty banning them. Nor has the US, but it has previously criticized Russia's extensive use of the weapon. Russian cluster munitions reportedly have a dud rate of 40%, meaning large numbers remain a hazard on the ground, whereas the average dud rate is believed to be close to 20%. The Pentagon estimates its own cluster bomblets have a dud rate of less than 3%. Why is Ukraine asking for them? Ukraine's forces are running desperately low on artillery shells, largely because, like the Russians, they use them up at an extraordinarily high rate and Ukraine's Western allies cannot replace them at the speed they are needed. In the largely static, grinding battlefronts of southern and eastern Ukraine, artillery has become a key weapon. The Ukrainians now face a daunting task in trying to dislodge the invading Russians from their well-dug-in defensive positions stretched along a 1,000 kilometers, 621-mile, battlefront. In the absence of enough artillery shells, Ukraine has asked the US to restock its supplies of cluster munitions to target the Russian infantry manning all those defensive trenches. This has not been an easy decision for Washington, and is deeply unpopular with many Democrats and human rights advocates. The debate has been going on for at least 6 months. What effect will this U.S. decision have? The immediate effect will be to knock away much of the moral ground Washington sits on in this war. Russia's numerous alleged war crimes are well documented, but this move is likely to draw accusations of U.S. hypocrisy. Cluster munitions are a hideous, indiscriminate weapon that is banned in much of the world for good reason. This U.S. move will inevitably place it somewhat at odds with its Western allies, and any perceived split in that alliance is exactly what Russian President Vladimir Putin wants and needs. Please subscribe to my channel for more videos. Thank you very much, and Jesus Christ loves you.